Okay, good morning. Good morning, everybody. I imagine they did explain the switch for today, that I'm covering my father's slot, but I'm doing my regular shear. So my father will be here, B'ezrat Hashem, next week. And I apologize if anyone was expecting him, but we'll do our best to learn something meaningful during this time. Yes, absolutely. The mic's not so clear? Okay, is this better or worse? Not so good.
I'll send Sam.
Yeah. Have him come in and try to see if we can change it. Anyone else need a source sheet? Okay, so as always, right before our just a new announcement that this year, or my share, is now sponsored by Hedy and Ben Lipschitz. So thank you so much to Hedy and Ben for your sponsorship, very much appreciated. And as always, and it's also very interesting, shir is taking place during a very auspicious time for OUisrael. I believe as we speak now. The soldier that we had been davening for 10 years, Hadar Goldin, is right now, as we speak, being buried in Kfar Saba, which is something that I'm sure we're all very elated to hear of his body's return and the closure that will give his family. And we continue to daven that our learning should be izchut for all of our chayalim, and should bring nechama to all those who have been affected by this war. And Hashem should give guidance to our leaders to make the right decisions, Be'ezrat Hashem. Okay, so I hope, I don't know if anybody did, last week in our class we didn't finish the source sheet, so I asked you to bring it back. If you did it, it's okay, because I had them make new copies. So that's just by way of explaining that we are coming in a little bit in the middle. Today's class is basically, we're going to finish what we had been doing last week and then start the next step of it. We're in the middle of discussing the concept of Kavana, the concept of having a certain type of certain intention during davening. What we saw last week was we discussed the elevated kavana that is needed for all of tefillah, all of prayer, and in particular Shmona Esrei. That although we strive to have this elevated kavana for all of our davening, for the whole time that we daven, it is specifically required during Shmona Esrei, and in particular, we saw that it is required during the first bracha of Shmona Esrei, the bracha of Avot, and according to many opinions, for the bracha of Modim, for the Tefila of Modim as well. And that whereas from the Gemara and the Rishonim, if a person did not have this kavana, this elevated kavana during that first bracha, according to the Gemara and according to the Rishonim, a person should repeat Shmona Esrei. Nevertheless, we saw that the Ramah notes that nowadays we're concerned that our ability to concentrate has gotten worse over time, as opposed to better over time, and we're concerned that if a person were to repeat Shmona Esrei again and try to correct it, he again wouldn't have kavana, and therefore wouldn't necessarily fix it, and therefore lahalacha, we paskin that even if for some reason you weren't able to have kavana during the first bracha of Shmona Esrei, you should not repeat Shmona Esrei. You should continue wherever you're up to and try to have kavana from there. What kind of kavana should a person have? What is this elevated kavana that a person needs to have? Because we've noted before that for all mitzvot, there is a concept that we need a certain level of kavana. We need to have in mind that we're doing the mitzvah. What is the elevated kavana that a person needs when they're davening? So we discussed last week that the elevated kavana has two parts to it. One is very simply understanding the words that you are saying, that we should endeavor to know when I'm saying the tefillah, when I say the tefillah of Slach Lanu Avinu Ki Chatanu, what does that mean? That I'm asking God for forgiveness. When we say Vili Yerushalayim Ircha Berachamim Tashuv, when we daven that Hashem should return to Yerushalayim, we should know what we're saying. That is the elevated kavana that is needed for tefillah. And in addition, there is a concept of recognizing and remembering and understanding that we are standing in front of God. That we need to remember, it doesn't necessarily have to be explicit kavana throughout, but it should be some kind of a latent kavana when we're davening, that we're saying the words, we're having kavana for those words, and a recognition that we are standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is why much of the tefillah that we have, Psukei de Zimra and Kriyat Shema, are really kind of a lead-in to Shmona Esrei. Because Shmona Esrei is meant to be the moment where we are literally standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And much of what we do is meant to help prepare us for those moments. What I wanted to do today, we were meant to do at the end of last week, and we'll do today, is highlight a number of halachot that we have specifically for Shmona Esrei, that are all geared towards helping us achieve this kavana. We saw the same thing with Shema. We noted how Shema also has an elevated concept of kavana, that you have to have the concept of kabbalat od malchut shemayim. You're supposed to remember that we're accepting the yoke of heaven. And we mentioned that because Shema needs this elevated kavana, there are certain halachot that we have for Shema, that we're supposed to cover our eyes, that we're supposed to say the pasuk out loud. Those are all meant to help us achieve this heightened level of kavana. The same thing is true of Shemona Esrei. Shemona Esrei has unique halachot geared towards it with the purpose of helping us elevate our own sense of kavana to be able to achieve the level of kavana that we are going to. Should I try without the mic? Would that be better? No. Okay, fine. Okay, good. So that's what we have right now. If you look in your source sheets, we said that the heading is special halachot for Shemona Esrei. The first one is, there is a halacha that for Shemona Esrei we need to stand. Okay, most of us, that's very logical. We know that we do that. In fact, the name that is given for Shemona Esrei in many places is what? Amidah, because we are literally standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Where does this come from? So the earliest source is a medrash. Source number 1, where the pasuk describes Avram Avinu, and the pasuk says that Avram stood el hamakom asher amad sham, and Chazal say that this was a reference to Shacharit, this was a reference to the Tefila of Shacharit that Avram had instituted. Zu Tefilat Shacharit, mikan amru Chazal, Avram tikein Tefilat HaShachar, that this pasuk is the source for the concept that Avram had established the Tefila of Shacharit. And because it says Asher Amad Sham, continues the medrash, Tefila Me'umad. We also learn from here that the vision, the imagery of a classic tefillah would be somebody who is standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore from there we're going to, Chazal conclude that is how we are supposed to be when we say Shemona Esrei as well. If you look at source number 2, the Rambam already discusses this. When he discusses different aspects of tefillah, source number 2, halacha aleph, Shmona dvarim tzarich hamitpalel lehizaher bahem vela'asotan. There are 8 things that ideally a person who is davening, now again, this means davening in general, but also specifically Shemona Esrei, that he needs to be careful to do. V'im haya dachuk o ne'enas, O she'avar velo asautam ein ma'akvin. Even though they are ideal, if a person for whatever reason couldn't do it, he was in a situation where he couldn't do these things, or he forgot, or he davened already and he realized he didn't do it, nevertheless you still were yotzei. You still were yotzei the tefillah. And what are they? Ve'eluhem, and these are the following things. Amidah, a person should stand. Nochach hamikdash. Nochach hamikdash means we should be facing towards the Beit HaMikdash, right? Which in Chutz La'aretz, or at least in America, meant facing east. Many people here in Israel get confused sometimes, especially people from America who make aliyah. You ask them, where do you need to face when you're davening? They always say facing east. That's true in America. In Israel, it's not always, depends where you are in Israel. Where should you face? Yerushalayim. Depends where you're standing. Depends where you are in Israel. That's where you should be facing. You should be facing Yerushalayim. Tikkun haguf. Tikkun haguf just means you should have a clean body. Make sure that you are clean and tahor properly for davening. Tikkun hamalbushim. Tikkun hamalbushim refers to making sure that you are dressed appropriately. Now, we're not going to get into the details of what that means, but there is a concept that when you are davening, you should be dressed appropriately. Whether that means you should put on a hat and jacket, or it means you should wear pants, or it means you should wear a hair covering. There's different interpretations, and very much depends on what we would call minhag hamakom. But the concept of being dressed appropriately is definitely something that is there. Tikkun hamakom means making sure you set yourself up in a place that is appropriate for davening. Hashvayat hakol, I believe, is referring to your voice, and in terms of the tone, not too loud, making sure you're saying the words, but you're not talking too loudly. Kriya refers to bending your knees. V'hishtachavaya means to bow down. That there are certain parts of the tefillah when you should be bowing down or bending your knees, etc. So these, says the Rambam, are 8 things that are ideally part of the Shemona Esrei experience. But if you couldn't do them for some reason, they're not ma'akev. Continues the Rambam in Halacha Bet. Amidah ketzad. What does it mean, Amidah? Ein mitpalel ela me'umad. It means you should be standing. And then he continues, Haya yoshev basfina o ba'agala. What happens if you're on an agala? You're on a ship, okay? And you're not on one of these fancy cruises, but you're on a ship that's going shipping back and forth, and you can't really stand up. Okay, o ba'agala, or you're on a wagon. Im yachol la'amod yamod. Ideally, you should try to stand. Im lav yeshev bimkomo v'yitpalel. But if not, it's not as we saw as we already saw from the Rambam earlier. If you can't, you can't. If you can't, it's still okay, and you can still daven. And we'll see. Probably the most practical application for us in this would be davening on an airplane, and maybe certain people in certain contexts davening on a bus. We'll get to that. We'll get to that as well. Sorry? Sick people, so for sure, absolutely as well. Sick people as well. People are in bed and can't get up. Look at source number 3. The Shulchan Aruch paskins this way as well, but the way he gives an interesting explanation for why a person needs to stand. Meaning, we saw right now the context was Avram stood. We also, I think, logically understand that standing up creates a certain import to the tefillah. But the Shulchan Aruch gives a different explanation as well. Look at source number 3. Hatfilah hi bimkom hakorban. Let's remember, says the Shulchan Aruch, says Rav Yosef Cairo, that tefillah is meant to replace the sacrifices. That in many different ways, part of our tefillah is a replication or a replacement for the fact that we're not able to bring korbanot nowadays. V'lachein, tzarich lihizaher, shetehei dugmat hakorban bekavana, v'lo ya'arav ba machshava acheret. Therefore, he says, you have to make sure that when you're davening, the intent that you're having is similar to the intention that you have in a korban. The halacha was that if a person brought a korban and he had the wrong kavanot, he had in mind the wrong korban, or he planned on eating it outside of the right time or eating it in the wrong place, that could passel the entire korban. The role of kavana, of having a certain intent, played a very big role in the world of korbanot. Says the Shulchan Aruch, we're not going to say it in the same level, but because tefillot are meant to replace korbanot, Kavana is going to be important. We have to make sure that we have the right kavana. Like we saw by korbanot, that having the wrong kavana could be posel the korban. Umad, and then he says, why should I stand? Dumya de avodah. If a person was bringing a korban, or if a korban was being brought for them, they needed to stand. They would stand and they would do the smicha. They would lean on the animal. They would do the vidui. So just like bringing a korban involved standing, so too, when we daven, which is meant to replace korbanot, we should make sure that we are standing. And then he goes on to discuss a lot of the other aspects of this as well, having the right place, wearing the right clothing. All, again, he says it's modeled after the korbanot. Yes?
I thought the first time when you say Shimon Esrei b'Yachidus, it's really to replicate Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And Chazaras Hashatz is to replace the korban that.
So that's okay. So it was.
Then if you should stand, I know a lot of people do stand
For Chazarat Hashatz, you're saying. Okay, so first of all, in terms of what she said was that she was under the impression that when a person says they're silent Shimon Esrei, that's modeling the avot, and Chazarat Hashatz is modeling the korbanot. There are some who suggest that. The simple understanding is that when we daven, even our own personal tefillah is actually a combination of both. Meaning that the Gemara has kol machlokes. Is it keneged the avot or is it keneged the korbanot? In the end, they say everyone agrees it's keneged the korbanot for various different reasons. But the point is that in the end of the day, it's not many understand it not be machlokes. That there really are two aspects to our davening. Our davening is patterned after both the avot and the korbanot. Now, in terms of what you're saying, that a person should stand for Shemona Esrei, that is true. Meaning the halacha does say that ideally a person should stand for Shemona Esrei because for Chazarat Hashatz, without getting into too much of this right now, but Chazarat Hashatz is ultimately meant to be the chazan is being motzi the entire tzibur with an additional tefillah. And in fact, there are many people who say not only should you stand, but you should stand with your feet together, like we're going to see soon, is the minhag to do for our own personal Shemona Esrei. Not everyone says you need to do that, but ideally you definitely should be standing. You shouldn't be talking. You shouldn't be checking your phone. All those things that we tend to do during Chazarat Hashatz, it becomes a little bit of a break. That is not the ideal. We should be concentrating because the chazan is really representing all of us and creating a tefillah. Soloveitchik used to call it, as we've mentioned before, tefillat hatzibur. It is a communal tefillah that is being represented by the chazan. So you are correct about that. Yes.
The Tefila, the Chazan, repeating it for himself or for the people to hear.
So the question was, is Chazarat Hashatz, is he saying it for himself or for the community? The answer is he's saying it for the community. He already said his tefillah. He said his private tefillah. There's no question that he is representing everybody. He's representing the community when he says Chazarat Hashatz, which means he needs to make sure to say it loud enough and at a pace that everyone can hear. 100%. 100%.
This is something that's come up often. Chazanim will repeat it so quickly.
Agreed. The Chazan should be saying it again. We've talked about this before, and I think ultimately there's different paces that work for different people, and there's different types of things. What I could hear is not necessarily something what somebody else can hear. So therefore, I think I'm hesitant to be too critical of a specific type. But it is true that the Chazan needs to make sure that his tzibor can hear and understand the words that he's saying. How fast that is, we could argue from today till tomorrow about how fast that should be and how slow that should be, but it is true that it should be something that is heard by everybody. Okay, so in fact, not only do we see in the Shulchan Aruch that you should stand for Shemona Esrei, but if you look at source number 4, the Mishnah Brura mentions that this is why many have the minhag to stand even a few seconds before Shemona Esrei. If you pay attention to most of the minhag that we have is, most of us don't stand up right before Shemona Esrei. We stand up, for example, in Shachris, we stand up when we start to say Michamocha. Or we have Kaddish by Mariv and Mincha, and we stand for Kaddish before Shemona Esrei. The idea being, we shouldn't just be getting up right before the Shemona Esrei, we should be standing before, and then entering this moment of standing before God. Look at source number 4. Katav b'darkei Moshe, Maharil haya noheg la'amod b'shacharit l'tfilat yudchet, tfilat Shemona Esrei, matai shehitchil hashatz tehilot le'el elyon. Okay, like we've said, that we have right at the end of, in the Shachris, right at the end of the last Birkat Kriyat Shema, when the Chazan says, Tehilot le'el elyon baruch hu mivorach, Moshe v'nei Yisrael, then people start to stand up. The idea being, we're preparing ourselves for the Amidah. Excuse me. Uve mincha, kishi yarad hashatz lifnei ateva. And at Mincha, when the Chazan got there, so I guess he stood for Ashrei and for Kaddish. Uve Arvid kishet chilachatz Kaddish. And in Mariv, once the Shliach Tzibor started Kaddish. Okay, Gam Yasir Az Kicho V'nio V'kol Davar Hamibalbel Machshavto. Well, why would he stand a few seconds earlier? To take those moments to calm ourselves down, to prepare ourselves appropriately, to be able to enter Shemona Esrei K'moshe Tzarich. Because if we just waited until the very end and just got up and said Hashem Svazai Tivtach, that would be more of a challenge. And as we're going to see soon, that's also part of the reason why we have the minhag of taking 3 steps back or 3 steps forward, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that's the idea. The idea being that we're preparing ourselves for Shemona Esrei. Now, this is all the ideal. Of course, as we saw in the Rambam, if a person is unable to stand for Shemona Esrei for whatever reason, then you can still be Yotzei Shemona Esrei. If you look at the source number 5 in the Shulchan Aruch, if somebody's riding on a donkey, you don't have to come down. Even if you have somebody who can hold your chamor. Now, I'm assuming this is referring to somebody who's traveling a long distance. If you're just going horseback riding, and you can wait till after you come down, because you're there doing it for an hour and a half, and then you'll have time to daven mincha mar, then you probably should wait until you come down. We're talking about somebody who is traveling, unable to come down because he's on a journey of some sort. Then then you can stay there and daven. Elamit palel derech hilucho. You should daven as you're traveling. Or if you're on a ship or you're on some kind of a caravan. If you're able to stand, great. Then you should daven where you are. Continuing in Seif Hey of the Shulchan Aruch, the next Seif. Bisfina uba agala, if you're on a ship or on a wagon, im yachola amod bimkom hakriyot, omeid kidei sheyehi koreo me'umad, uposeya gimel psiot. If you are able to stand up, at least at certain points you should. If you're able to take the 3 steps back, you should. Again, all of this is an ideal. If you're unable to do it, then it's okay for you to daven in your place. Practically, the poskim, as I mentioned, discuss this in the context of an airplane. Okay, airplane is one of those things where people are very passionate about these things. You have some people who, all of a sudden, when they're on an airplane, must stand for the entire davening, no matter who it inconveniences or causes. No, all of a sudden, the minyan is like the most important thing. We gather in the back, we're going to gather here, get people upset. Many poskim suggest that, again, if you're on an airplane where it's almost, let's say just as an example, for argument's sake, it's an El Al airplane, and they understand it, and they set aside an area, and it's done in conjunction with the stewardesses in the plane to set aside, then that could be a very meaningful thing. A person shouldn't forego davening with a minyan for no reason. But if you're in the context where it will cause any type of inconvenience to anybody, or any kind of chil Hashem, because you're standing up and standing in the hallway, and it upsets the stewardesses, or it upsets people, or it's dangerous because the seatbelt sign goes on, there is no question, many poskim suggest this. Again, I'm sure there are poskim who maybe would push you to still daven with a minyan, but many of the poskim that I have heard talk about this will say you should sit in your space and you should daven. This is what I do. I don't even look for the minyan personally. I daven where I am in my place. If again, I'm on an airplane where everybody is going to the same, I don't know, you're going to Uman. I have not gone to Uman. But let's say you're going to Uman, and the whole airplane is full of people who are all looking to daven, and it won't bother anybody. That's one thing. And I've had experiences like that where the stewardesses will even announce there's a minyan now in the back of the airplane. Okay, if the stewardesses announce that, I'm more comfortable doing it. If not, you should sit. I even find, by the way, that sometimes it's harder for me to concentrate when I'm standing up. I get more nauseous, and in which case, I think it's more appropriate to sit down. You definitely should sit down. What you should do is you should try to keep your feet together. Again, try to do what you can. I even would do a little bit of move my feet a little bit backwards for the parts that you're supposed to go back and forth. Try to imitate what you would be doing if you were standing. But it's okay to sit down if that's the context within which you find yourself. I think I saw a question, yeah.
I just had an interesting experience with a motion right now. And I feel back here last night, and I wanted to at least be able to say one Kaddish.
Sure.
And the guys remembered me from the airport. It was very, very nice. But how we handled this was that we would daven be a kibbut, but we got together for a parak of Tehillim
And a Kaddish. Okay, yes. Listen, obviously, and you are raising a good point, which is that sometimes these contexts have to do with somebody who wants a minyan for reasons of Kaddish, and therefore it could be an emotional aspect to it or something that's very important. But even that, very often, you can find a way to do it in a way, or you should strive to do it in a way that will not bother, or that is done in cooperation with the airplane. That sounds like a wonderful idea.
we had terrible turbulence.
Right. Well, we're still glad that you're here, even though you got back last night. Kol hakavod for coming. Okay, so that is halacha number one. Halacha number one that is meant to help us increase our davening is you should stand for Shemona Esrei. Another halacha that is mentioned regarding Shemona Esrei that is meant to help us increase our kavana is the halacha that you should stand there with your feet together. Okay, if you look at source number 6, this is mentioned in the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Sorry, turn the page. Yeah, turn the page, source number 6. Amar Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina, says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Hamitpalel tzarich sheyichavein et raglav. A person who davens should direct his feet. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, v'ragleihem regel yishara, and their legs were a straight leg. Says Rashi, what does it mean, yichavein et raglav? Because that could just mean I should point in a certain direction. What does it mean, yichavein? Rashi says, zu eitzel zu. It means you should put your feet together. Because the pasuk itself, how would we learn this from the pasuk? Because the pasuk says, v'ragleihem, their legs, regel yishara. What changed right there? Their legs became one leg. It turned from ragleihem to regel, and therefore a person should stand in a way that makes it appear as if they have one regel. Now there is machlokes in the Yerushalmi seems to understand it as not putting your feet together, but you're putting your feet one in front of the other. It's very interesting. We're not going to get into the details of that. We paskin that what it means is a person should put their feet together, again as a way of creating a certain aura and a certain ambiance as they are standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you look at the Shulchan Aruch, source number 7, he mentioned this explicitly. Yichavein raglav ze eitzel ze bikivun. A person should direct or guide his legs next to each other in one direction. Ki'ilu einam ela echad. Making it almost as if it's one leg, or one foot, Lihidamot lemalachim. In order to appear like malachim, shenemar dichtivem, the pasuk says, v'ragleihem, their legs, regel yishara, were a straight leg. Kilomar, says the Shulchan Aruch, ragleihem nirim kiregel echad, that their legs appeared like one leg, like one foot, and that is why when we're standing there in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're trying to almost raise ourselves up to the level of angels, standing in front of God as we daven. And then the Shulchan Aruch continues, v'yesh omrim, and some even add, Kishe'omed lehitpalel, when a person gets ready to daven, Yelech lefanav gimel psiot. A person should take 3 steps forward, derech karov v'hagasha ledavar shetzarich lasot. Why are we taking 3 steps forward? Because it shows that we are moving, we are bringing ourselves towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're almost stepping into God's abode. And that's the idea of taking 3 steps forward. Now, interestingly enough, sorry, 1 second. This is 1 second. Let me just finish this one and I'll take your question. I'm going to answer your question right now. Interestingly enough, what does the Shulchan Aruch not say? It doesn't say take 3 steps back and then 3 steps forward. So this is actually a misunderstanding. This is a misunderstanding. Before Shmona Esrei, you need only to take 3 steps forward. Why? Because what are you doing? Because if you think about it, the whole purpose is we are now stepping into HaKadosh Baruch Hu's abode. How do we do that? By taking 3 steps forward. Why off, and also, at the same time, at the end of Shmona Esrei, what are we supposed to do? Take 3 steps back. That's all you need to do in order to show that I've left my meeting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why is it that many people think we're supposed to take 3 steps back and 3 steps forward? I think it's just a practical point. Because if I'm standing here for davening, and this is where I want to end up again for Shmona Esrei, how can I do that if there's no place for me to take 3 steps forward? So what do? You take 3 steps back. Now you have space between you and where you want to end up. And then you take 3 steps forward. But let's say you're outside. Let's say you're at the kotel. Or let's say you're here in the shul. There is no need to take 3 steps back and then take 3 steps forward. You can simply take 3 steps forward as long as you're comfortable with where you end up. When you take those 3 steps forward, that can be where you want to daven. The same thing is at the end of Shmona Esrei. When you take 3 steps back, you say the brachot, that's really, you don't need to take 3 steps forward. Many have the minhag, if you're in shul, that you wait after taking 3 steps back. You wait until the chazan gets up to Kiddusha. And again, where do you want to end up? You want to end up at your spot, at your stender. So you take 3 steps forward to where you were. And then for Kiddusha, you put your feet together again, etc. Okay? So the 3 steps is, what's really needed is 3 steps forward at the beginning of Shmona Esrei and 3 steps back at the end of Shmona Esrei. Practically, sometimes that often means going back and forth. Yes?
I guess it having to do also with shuffling Yira Nahaba, when you could say it makes sense that before you start Shmona Esrei, it's Yira, and then you want to go start.
So I had heard when we're actually going to get to shuckling soon. That's also one of the things that's an interesting conversation about should a person shuckle or not. We'll get to that in a second. Shuckling meaning going like this, right? Okay. Now I had never heard that. Again, it could be. I've never heard that idea before, that the idea is that you would take 3 steps back for you're out of fear and then ava. Again, if you look here, he only mentions the 3 steps forward. And I think that points to this idea that the goal is we're taking 3 steps forward to show we're entering God's abode. We're entering that meeting with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Again, practically, very often, it just means in order to do that, they have to take 3 steps back. I'm not sure. Okay? Look at 1 second, let me just see. Yeah. The next thing is, if you look at source number 7, Sif Bet, and now we're going to get to the third idea. So far we've seen you need to stand, you need to have your feet together. The Chazal also discuss the way that a person should stand. The mode that a person should have. You're going to see right up. Look at source number 7, Seif Bet. How should a person put their hands? Where should he be looking with his mind, with his head? Says the Shulchan Aruch, Seif Bet, Tzarich sheyakuf rosho me'at. A person should bend his head down a little bit as a sign of humility. Sheyu einav lemate aretz, almost pointing your eyes towards the ground. Again, a sign of humility. V'yachshov ki'ilu omeid b'veit hamikdash. You should feel as if you are standing in the Beit Hamikdash in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Uvilibo yichavein lemala l'shamayim. But in your head, you should be thinking about davening towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the idea is, again, and we're going to see this in a second, I think if you look at Sif Gimel, they even describe or suggest how a person's hands should be. Okay? Meiniach yado al libo kifutin. You should have your hands like this. And it says, Hayimanit al asmalit, so it's actually your right hand on your left hand. I'm a lefty, so I'm usually doing it like this automatically. Okay? But you should, the halacha does say ideally, the way that a person should stand is with your hands like this on your heart, again, in a sign of humility, remembering that the purpose of tefillah is for us to be standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and recognize that we're standing in front of the Borei Olam. The way that we stand and the way that we are will impact some of that mentality. V'omeid, Hayimanit al asmalit, continues the Shulchan Aruch and Sif Gimel, v'omeid ke'eved lifnei rabo, and you should stand like a servant in front of his king, be'ema, with fear, be'yirah u'befachad, and you should have fear, and you should have, again, 3 different words of fear. You should be scared, or we should be serious, is the best way to say it. V'lo yaniach yadav al chalatzav, nimnei shu derech, and to put your hands on over here on your side is considered to be yuara. It's not necessarily appropriate for standing in front of the king. Now, that is how the Shulchan Aruch describes ideally. Says the Mishnah Berurah that much of this really depends on the way that people usually stand in front of a king. Some of this is what we would call based on the minhag hamakom. If you look at source number 8, Seif Katan Vav, the Mishnah Berurah, the second paragraph in the source number 8, Libo. Bimkom shenohagim. When should you stand like this with your hands over your heart? Bimakom shenohagin laamod kein lifnei melech kishemedabrim imo v'shoalim meito tzarcheihem v'hakol kiminhag hamakom. When is it appropriate to stand in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu with your hands on your heart like this? If that's how people usually stand when they walk in front of a king, asking the king for the things that they need. If we're in a society where the way that you deal with royalty is, slap him. No, I don't think you should do that. But if it's more mikubal to stand in a more, as we would say, at ease type of way, and that's what's considered appropriate when you were to go to a leader or a ruler and ask him for the things, then it would be okay for you to do that here. Again, a lot of this has to do with, because ultimately, what's the purpose? The purpose isn't to show God something. The purpose is to create a certain kavana within ourselves, a certain intent and understanding within ourselves. So if in most places, if we were to go to the king, we would stand there like this and ask him for something, that's how we would stand, then we should do the same thing for Hashem. But if doing that won't necessarily help create that mindset in us, because that's not how we usually go when we talk to leaders and ask them for things, so then we can be a little bit more at ease and be more comfortable, because ultimately it's about trying to create a certain mentality within our own minds. There's a whole conversation here as well about keeping your eyes closed, keeping your eyes open. That's also a big discussion. Should a person close their eyes when they're davening Shemona Esrei, or maybe they should open them and look at the Sidur? And this Chazal basically say, the poskim basically say, whichever one gives you more kavana, whichever one will give you the most amount of kavana, that's what you should do. For some people, closing their eyes helps them concentrate. But there's also for other people, closing their eyes makes it more likely that their mind is going to go elsewhere. But if they're looking at something, they're looking at the words and they're focusing on the words, that'll help them concentrate. So everybody should really try to find that right proper medium that works for them.
What is the source for what you just said, please?
Which one?
That you can do whatever you want, which is more comfortable for you.
So that's I don't have that here, but that's something that the poskim discuss in the context. I'm talking about specifically in the context of using a siddur versus yet. I didn't bring that here, but I can try to find it for you. Okay. But if you look at source number 9. This is where the Aruch HaShulchan highlights this same idea in the way that we were just describing it. It's not necessarily in the context of using a siddur versus not, but he is discussing the idea of what will help you in kavana. Ve'ein tiv'ei b'nei adam shavim zazeh. People's nature are not the same. There are some people that standing like this will help them concentrate, and there are some people that standing like this will be uncomfortable for them, and it won't help them concentrate. There are some people who have trouble holding their hand, will have trouble concentrating if they have to put their hand on top of their heart. Rather, they prefer to put their hands on the stender like this. Okay? Everybody is different. Al hadavuk bakotel, or on something else that's by the wall. Ve'ein klal kavua. There is no set rule. Even though the Shulchan Aruch does mention a recommendation based on what used to be the best way for a person to achieve this kavana. Kol echad yaseh kifi ma shemutav lo lehitpalel beofen zeh. Everybody should do what will help them. And again, we have to be honest about these things. What will help them achieve kavana? So although that kind of answers your question, because it wasn't talking specifically about using a siddur versus closing your eyes, but in the context of how your hands should be and how you should present yourself, much of this has to do with what will help you achieve that level of kavana. Okay, one or two more, and then I want to get to the other part that we were supposed to do today, which is talking about suggestions for helping achieve kavana in general. So this is the question: should we shackle or should we stand still? Should a person stand like this when they're davening, or should a person go like this? Or should they go like this, right? Or if you see people going like this, right? There's so many different ways that people will do this. Some people dance, some people this, that. What is the way that a person how should they be when they're davening? And we're talking specifically now about Shemona Esrei, because again, remembering that Shemona Esrei is meant to be the pinnacle of our Tefila. That is when the Amidah, we are standing in front of Hashem. The Ramah, in source number 10, suggests the following: Nahagu hamidaktikim, those who are midaktik, those who are very careful, have the minhag lehit noah, to move, or what we would call shackle, bisha'a shekorin ba'Torah, that they would chuckle when they're reading the Torah. They would go like this, back and forth. Dugmat haTorah shenatna biretet. Similar to when the Torah was given, the Am Yisrael were trembling. And just like Am Yisrael trembled when the Torah was given, so too these people shake a little bit when the Torah is being read. V'chein b'sha'a shemit palalim. And the same thing is true. Many people have the minhag that when they're davening, they go like this, they shuckle, they do this. And what's that based on? Al Shem, because the pasuk says, again, this isn't the source, but it's a hint to it. The pasuk says, we say this in Nishmat Kol Chai, Kol atzmotai tomarna Hashem mikamocha. All of my bones will talk about you, or will talk to you, Hashem, who is like you. So that references the idea that we're supposed to use our entire body when we are engaged in the act of tefillah. Okay, the Mishnah Brura here in right after source number 10, the second paragraph, notes that not everyone agrees that you should shuckle. V'yesh poskim shecholkim al zeh. And there are some people who argue on this. V'yomrim debitfila ein lihit. No, it's not appropriate for you to shuckle back and forth. V'rach b'psukei dezimra u'pirkot kriya shema v'limud Torah afilu shabal peh minhag lehitnaneya. Okay, and then he says some people say you should, many poskim say you shouldn't, and then the Mishnah Brura says the line that is most important for us: V'kasav amagin Avram da'avid kimar avid u'da'avid kimar avid. Everyone, if you did this way, it could be good. If you did that way, it also could be good. It depends on you, once again. If the shuckling helps you concentrate, then you should shake, then you should shuckle. And then he says, if not, if standing straight will help you give you kavana, because it enables you to get into a meditative state and it helps you focus more, then that's what you should do. And then he says, but to do it exaggerated forms of moving around, he says that's a little bit almost inappropriate. It turns the tefillah almost into a bit of a joke. He calls it a bit ga'ava. So shuckling, if it helps you, is great. If it doesn't help you, that's also great. Each of these, again, are meant to be tools to help us achieve kavana, and we should do whatever works for us. Yes?
I'm going back to this again, but this is all kavanah for the person saying it.
Correct.
What is the role of kavanah where the chazan is repeating things like the Shema Yisrael? Is it for the chazan to have kavanah himself?
Specifically for Chazarat Hashatz?
Is it a job to bring kavanah, greater kavanah?
Well, again, Chazarat Hashatz is the Chazan is saying the tefillah on behalf of all of us, and it's a tefillah for all of us. And it happens to be specifically there, we're using the concept of Shomea Ke'oneh. We're hearing him say the brachot, we're saying Amen to the bracha, and it's as if we as a community said this tefillah. So he represents all of us. Now, he can't have kavana for us. He has kavana for himself. We have to be paying attention and listening and having kavana in the same way in order to ensure that we're able to be a part of it. But
you have to say it in a way that the olam can have kavanah.
Absolutely, and that's what we talked about. He has to have in mind that he's being motzi them. They have to have in mind that they're being yotze with him, and he must make sure that he's saying it in a way that everyone can hear. Agreed.
What about
Those who don't do that, it's problematic.
they do blah, blah, blah?
Then it's problematic. They shouldn't do blah, blah, blah. I agree with you. Okay. The next aspect, halacha, connected to our understanding or what is meant to help us in our achieve a higher level of kavanah Shemona Esrei, is the idea of not holding certain things. We shouldn't be holding certain things during Shemona Esrei. And this is something we're going to get to hopefully at the beginning of the end of today's class, and focus on a lot more on next week, which is various suggestions to help improve our own level of kavanah. So here as well, the Gemara even talks about that a person, when they are davening or saying Shemona Esrei, should not hold anything that is of considerable value. Because if you hold something which, if you were to drop, would break, you're not going to be able to properly concentrate while you're davening, because you're constantly going to be thinking about what you're holding. Another good example of what you shouldn't be holding, and lahavdil, but it's so important, would be holding a baby. Okay? Can a person hold a baby and say Shemona Esrei? Now again, I'm all for husbands trying to give their wives time off during the morning or whatever it's going to be. Ideally, that should not be during davening. Ideally, that should be at another time. Find time to daven and maybe take time out of something else to give your wife time off during, but you should not be holding your baby. Again, it's actually an interesting discussion. What if you're wearing one of those things called a baby bjorn, where you can hold the baby, but you're not going to be nervous about it? There, the halacha says maybe it's okay. Or alternatively, it could be the baby's going to be distracting. So these are different. Anything which will interrupt your kavana should not be held during davening. Look at source number 11. I'm sorry?
Or anybody else.
if somebody else's kavanah.
Oh, absolutely. And it goes, of course, if bringing the baby will disrupt other people's kavanah, that goes without saying. That goes without saying, and that's something you should be very sensitive to. We talked about that also. How we saw, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, that the Shulchan Aruch was very charif about people who bring their children to shul. Something that and although there's people are two different minds on this issue, whether it's good to try to bring kids to help teach them to have decorum, or you should wait until they're old enough and then bring them to shul. One thing's for sure, you have a responsibility not just to help with your children's decorum, but with your neighbor's decorum. And you should make sure that if you do bring your children, it's only if they are able to sit quietly, and if they don't, even in the middle of Shmona Esrei, and your kid starts crying, the halacha says you should get up, leave your Shmona Esrei, take your kid out, and then continue Shmona Esrei where you are, because you have a responsibility towards the tzibor to create a certain sense of decorum. Yes?
That comes out on Shabbos, hopefully. What do rabbis today say about holding a cell phone?
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. We're going to get to that. We'll get to that in 1 second. That's the end. It's the end here. Yes, the Piskei Teshuvos, meaning the Mishnah Berurah wasn't talking about using a cell phone. The Shulchan Aruch wasn't talking about using a cell phone. The Piskei Teshuva, which is a more modern posek, does discuss the idea of, and he's not even talking about using. There's two different ways to look at this, which is holding your phone in your pocket, holding your phone in your hand. There's also the level of using your phone for Shmona Esrei. All of those are separate questions. We'll get to it in 1 second. But let's just see the main halacha. Source number 11, the Shulchan Aruch. Kishahu mitpalel. When a person davens, lo ye'echoz biyado tefillin. You shouldn't be holding, meaning obviously you can wear your tefillin, but you shouldn't be holding your tefillin bag, let's say. Or sefer michtevei kodesh, or any kind of sefer, something that you'd be nervous to drop. Velo ke'aram le'ah, or a plate full of food. Velo sakin umaot, or money, or a knife, anything which you would be careful not to drop. You're going to have a certain amount of kavana. You're going to be thinking about it, whether you realize it or not, subconsciously as you're davening. And you should not be holding these things. Because your mind is going to be thinking about making sure that these don't fall. And that's going to take away from your kavana. Then he says, what about a lulav? Interesting question. A lulav, now again, lulav usually we hold only for Shmona Esrei. Only for Hallel. Okay, but I've even seen this. I've seen many people in my community. I have an agricultural community, and they tend to like to hold the lulav and esrog. They come in, Psukei de Zimra, holding their lulav and esrog. Shmona Esrei, they're holding the lulav and esrog. They hold the lulav and esrog for all of davening. Am I allowed to if I want to? So this, he says, is okay. Why? Because since you're involved in the mitzvah of lulav, we're less nervous about it preventing you from kavanah, because it's part of what you're doing is being involved in the mitzvah and the simcha of davening and of holding your lulav, which is an interesting take. Yes? Correct. So those people who don't take their lulav when they're davening, but towards the end of Chazar Tashat start taking everything out, making noise, and you can't hear anything, correct. Ideally, what the shul should do is, part of why they do that is because they want to make sure that by the time the chazan starts Hallel, they're ready. Okay, so what a shul should do is after Chazar Tashat, give people a minute or two. Those who want to go out and say the bracha and the sukkah, those who have to get their stuff ready, and then it gives people time to take everything out. 100%. Again, we always need to be sensitive to the people around us, not to disrupt them.
During Chazar Tashat, no one should look in the sefer.
That is brought down. Again, there's different opinions about that. Most poskim believe that you should absolutely not be learning something during Chazarat Hashatz. And some people even say, I didn't see this inside, but my brother-in-law told me this, that he said that anyone who does that, not only did you not do the right thing, but the learning, you don't even get credit for the learning that you did during that time. Because again, at that time is when we're supposed to be focusing on other things. I can't say I'm always great about it. Sometimes I'm pressured or I'm not paying attention and I do it. But we shouldn't be. Yes?
Say you put your hand in your pants pocket like a man would, and then you find on Shabbos the muktzah.
Okay.
Then you drop it on the floor.
Again, that's a separate question regarding muktzah. Let's say if you realize, the halacha does say if you realize in the middle that you have something in your pocket that's muktzah, you don't have to get rid of it right away. If you took it out in your hand, you might have to then go do something with it. But let's say you realize, oh my gosh, I have my car keys, if there's house keys on it, it might not be a problem. I don't want to get into all of the different halachot. But the answer is, if you need to take care of something because it's urgent or because either halachically or practically, you do what you need to do. But you should ideally be paying attention. You're right. We're absent-minded. We do things that we shouldn't be doing, but we're talking about the ideal and the things that we should be striving for. Let's get to cell phones. Look at source number 12. Okay. Now again, this is an interesting thing. I think this was written before we were even talking about smartphones. I don't even think we're talking about smartphones. I think this is talking about when we were talking about those Nokia phones, or what we call nowadays stupid phones, right? The phones that all they did was ring and play Snake. That was all they did. Okay? Those of you who know what snake is. Okay. Look at source number 12. Source number 12 says the Piskei Teshuvot. Piskei Teshuvot is a modern day posek written on the Shulchan Aruch. Kishehu mitpalel. He's quoting the underlined part is quoting the Shulchan Aruch. Lo yachos biyado tefillin, velo sefer, velo sakin umaot. You shouldn't hold a knife. You shouldn't hold money. Vikikar or bread. V'dei shelibo aleim shelo yiplu v'yitrod v'titbadel kavanato. Because if you do, it's going to take away from your kavana. V'mishnah brura katav dahani lavdafka ele ein li tol biyado shum davar b'shat tefila. And the Mishnah Brura pointed out that really you shouldn't take anything. Certainly not something that you're afraid is going to fall. V'hatam. What's the reason? What's the problem with not holding something? So if the issue is that you're afraid it's going to fall, it's going to take away from your kavanah. Those who say you shouldn't even hold anything, even something which is not so valuable, what's the idea? It's not appropriate that you're standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu holding, even if it's just, a piece of paper. She'ein derech eretz la'amod b'fnei anashim gedolim v'chafatzim biyado. It's not appropriate for you to be standing there with something in your hand. V'kol shekein livnei melech malchei hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're in source number 12, the third line. V'lachen afilu tluyin b'tzavaro. This is an interesting question. It says, Piskei Teshuvot, what if it's hanging on my neck? Okay, I have one of those, I don't know. I have some kind of something, or the example that I'm thinking of is many people when they go on hikes. So they have those things that you can put your phone into, like a special teak that you could put, a waterproof thing that you put your phone into, and it has a thing that you can put on around your neck. Can I daven with that hanging around my neck? I'm not worried it's going to fall. So the Piskei Teshuvot is suggesting and saying, even if you're not worried that it's going to fall, is that the way to approach HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Maybe you should take it off and put it down. Because standing in front of Hashem with these things, again, I don't think there's a hard, fast rule, but the sensitivity here is very, very important. So even if you have something hanging from your tzavar, let's just turn my page 1 second. Al ktefo, or it's on your shoulder. Yesh lo lisalkam me'elav. Then you should take it off. She'ein na'eh la'amod b'fnei gedolim v'chashuvim. And there, because it's not appropriate to stand in front of important people. Let's say you have a knapsack. Should I daven with a knapsack on my shoulder? Most of us would admit that that's not necessarily the most appropriate way to stand in front of Hashem and to daven. Because when you stand there with your knapsack, what are you showing? I'm ready to go. Right? I'm ready to go. I'm going to do this. I'll do what I need to do. I'm Yotze Zayin, but I'm ready to go. V'kol sakit matzlema, or a camera hanging around your neck. All of these things, says the Piskei Teshuvot, is not necessarily appropriate. Now look to the third paragraph. Umikan nilmad ad kama chamur lahachzik bivigdo telephone b'shat tefila. Now we see from here how serious it is, problematic it is, to have your phone on you when you're davening. Number one, halul litzaltzel bikol. If it's going to ring, if you didn't quiet it, the tefila will make a noise. It'll bother you. It'll bother the rest of the tzibor. That for sure. Latrid gam et shara mitpalalim shegarat tvei mikol shara lachod shekatuv b'Gemara. Okay, so first of all, it might disrupt other people. Okay, v'gam oseh b'kach. Now, if you look at we're in the third paragraph, the third line, the middle of the line. V'gam oseh b'kach schok v'hitul mikidushat beit hamidrash. It also, when you walk in with your phone, if the chance that it's going to ring, or even just using your phone, it's causing a bit of a disgrace to the base medrash, to the shul. The shul isn't the place where we should be checking the sports scores. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. He's talking about where you're using it, where either you're having it, and I believe, again, I'm not sure when he's writing this, but he's writing this before there was a smartphone. I think he's talking about before there was a time when people used their phones for davening. And I want to get to that in a second. He's talking about, and I would say many of us when we're in shul are not using our phones for davening. I'm not, at least. When do I ever use my phone for davening? And I was someone who had a tough time using my phone for davening. I felt that it was going to desensitize me. But when do I often do that? If I'm on a tiyul, or I'm here and I find myself, if I'm here in shul, I would suggest, again, everyone can do what they feel is most appropriate. I would suggest if you're in shul, better not to use your phone, just on the chance that it might somehow distract you, because it's a lot easier to do something else when you're on your phone, and you should use a sitter. But I think he's even talking at a time when all the phone did was, you could call somebody, or you could maybe text. I don't think he was referring to times when the phone was used for anything else. So then he says, "Afilu aso matzav shel rotat." Even if you put it on the mode of that it's going to vibrate. Shirak hu margish b'davar. Okay, it's in your pocket and it's going to vibrate. It won't disrupt anybody else. But who will it disrupt? You. Okay. If having your phone in your pocket When it vibrates, it might distract you because you have to check who it is. It might be an emergency. Now, of course, I'm being playful. Sometimes there are emergencies, but most of the time there's no emergency, okay? Or how many times have you had this? I've had this as well, where the phone is in my pocket, it doesn't even vibrate, but it's what's called a phantom vibrate, where I feel like my leg is moving and I think it's going, I'm like touching it. Even that just distracts me. When you have the phone on you, it will inevitably cause some kind of distraction somehow. And just like we're not supposed to hold things when we daven that might distract us, that same thing, says the Piskei Teshuvos, the same thing would be using your phone. Now, what could you do? The most ideal thing to do, and again, I'm not saying this from experience, I wish I could say that I did this, is leave it outside of the shul. Leave it in your car when you come into shul. I don't know how many of us are capable of doing this, but I'm going to throw it out there as an ideal. Leave it outside of shul. Again, we're not talking about a case where you need it. Leave it outside of shul. Leave it somewhere else. Okay, you can't do that. Put it next to you, face down, in a way that you won't look at it during davening. Okay, I remember hearing an important point that resonated with me in a different context, but very much resonates with me regarding this. I think the person who said this, it was a video, I believe his name was Simon Sinek, who's very well known, I don't know if I pronounced his name right. Simon, he's like a well-known industrial psychologist, talks about leadership and how people can, discuss, trying to help CEOs and leaders of companies be able to create the proper environment for in their institutions or in their companies. And he's talking about the dangers of a cell phone. And he said, let's say you're holding your phone and someone comes up to you and says, hey, Yossi, can I talk to you for a few minutes? There's two ways that you could respond. One way they could respond is they come to me, I'm holding my phone, and they say, Yossi, can I talk to you for a few minutes? I say, sure, what's going on? That's one way I could have the conversation. But what if, he said, they come to me and they say, Yossi, can I talk to you for a few minutes? And I go like this. I put it in my pocket, or I put it away, and then I say, sure, what's going on? What message did I give that person? That right now the most important thing for me is what you're about to say to me. When we hold the phone in our pocket, or we hold the phone right over here, or we put the phone over here, there's a certain, even if subconscious concept of, I'm there, but I'm not fully there. If we leave the phone outside of the room, we leave the phone over here, we leave the phone in a way where we know that it'll be very hard for us to get distracted, the message that we are sending to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to ourselves is right now, I'm in Tefillah. I'm fully in. This is important to me. And therefore, again, we have to think about these things, and everyone should make their own decision. Now, regarding using the phone for davening, it is a wonderful thing that technology is also able to be used for these types of things. And as I mentioned, I had trouble. I refused to download the app, the Siddur app, for a number of times. I said, I don't want to ever use my phone for davening because I'm afraid that the slippery slope. I'll use it for davening, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of davening, I'll start doing this and start doing that. But there were times where, because of that, I didn't have a siddur, and I caved, and I do it, and I do use it at times for davening. But what I would suggest is, if you do use it for davening, what you should make sure to do is put on airplane mode, put it on some kind of silence in a way where you're going to ensure 100% that you are not going to get distracted. Now, let's be honest. Even if it's on airplane mode, there are still plenty of things we could do on our phone that will distract us without it. And therefore, we have to be vigilant, right? It's very hard to make sure that you're not going to do anything else when you're just using it for davening. We can do it. We're capable. We're adults. We can do it. But you have to be very, very vigilant. I would suggest that even if you use your phone for davening, it should only be where you had no other choice. Because of the fact that we can very easily go into doing other things, especially during Chazarat HaShatz or while we're waiting or whatever else is going on. But again, that's a personal choice. I just leave that for you to think about. Okay, we have only a couple of minutes. And we're now getting to the very end. This is going to be this section, and next week we're going to finish this, which is getting into discussing more suggestions for improving Kavana. Meaning, get practical. We've been discussing the different levels of Kavana. We've been discussing the different levels of Kavana needed for Shema and for Shmona Esrei, and the halachot that are associated with each of them as a result of this higher level of Kavana that is needed. And the last thing that we're going to do is just list, and it's going to be a bit of a detailed list that I would like to work through with you. Different suggestions that I've been able to glean from various Sfarim of ways that we can improve our Kavana in a practical way. Because we've been talking about how important it is. What can we do? Okay, so we even talked today a little bit about it. What we use, what we surround ourselves with, we'll highlight it. We'll highlight it again. The first thing I just want to mention is we'll just do the first two sources right over here, and then we'll do this next week. Rav Rimon in his sefer has a sefer on Tefila. Source number 13. He stresses something very important. Many people come in and say, I want to have Kavana. How do I do it? Says Rav Rimon, the most important thing to remember is Ein Sgulot LeKavana B'Tefillah. There's no Sgula. You can't just, say something or jump up and down or clap your hands. This isn't one of those magical things where you can just do X and all of a sudden you're going to have Kavana. Kavana, like many things in Yahadut, takes work. Nothing is going to all of a sudden turn us into people who can have Kavana. Kavana b'tefila doreshet avodah. It requires work. Without that effort, we cannot have proper Kavana. Look at source number 14, and with this we'll end. Says Rav Steinsaltz a similar idea. But he takes it a step further. Even though there is no magic formula that applies to everyone, there are ways to achieve Kavana. Each person's soul is a unique world unto itself, and what works for one person is not necessarily effective for another. Nevertheless, there are some pieces of advice that are likely to be useful to some extent for some people. And that is what we're going to do next week, is get into some of those areas of advice. Everybody is different. We're going to throw out ideas, and each of us can take for ourselves what we feel will help us in our Kavana. Okay, wishing everybody a wonderful, wonderful week.